Hi, everyone. Welcome to our last AI in Action webinar workshop for this semester. We have Amanda Tainter here who is going to present everything that she knows about from COR to Canvas AI-powered course design. So I will hand it over to you. If you have any questions, though, put them in the chat or interrupt her. You can do either. I know she's going to say the same thing, but if it's in the chat, I will interrupt her if you don't want to. Okay, handing it off.
Perfect. All right. Well, welcome everybody. So I quite frankly can't remember exactly what the description is, but basically what I'm hoping to accomplish today and what we should accomplish today is we're going to take a look at how we take our curriculum outline of record and make it into a course that we can teach. And this isn't primarily for online or anything. But it works really well for online because we'll break down the structure and how to create that on online class. So the title is From Core to Canvas, AI-powered course design. And I know there's lots of different opinions on how AI should be used or can be used or ethically. And we're not going to engage in that conversation here in this space today. We're going to approach it with the thought that we're all open to this is possibly a tool to be able to use with our curriculum outline of record and in designing of our course. But I'm happy to engage in the ethical conversation of should we or shouldn't we, definitely at a different time. Lori put the link to the presentation in the chat. I'm also hoping to engage in a little bit of interaction. I'm always leery to do that on an AI presentation because sometimes it can be unpredictable, and a lot of times we just want to listen. So uh, when we do the more engaging interactive part, please don't feel like you have to. You can just follow along and don't feel like you have to log out. Sometimes when I hear interactive, I immediately hit leave meeting because I'm just here to listen. Please stay. You will not have any obligation to do a share out or anything like that. You are more than welcome to just hang out. And hold on a second, my Gamma is reloading. And then in full disclosure, I did use AI to help me make this presentation. And that's there. All right, I think we're reloaded. I'm sharing okay. Looks like it. All right. So what are we going to do today? We're going to look at what the challenge is. We're going to understand the gap between those curriculum outline of record, SLO outcomes, and how we can take those and start with that and create an actionable course design. And we'll talk about backward design and all those fantabulous words that I love to talk about throughout the context or the presentation. Um, AI is great as a translator. We'll look at it on translating our very academic sounding student learning outcomes into something that is usable. We're going to look at it for creating authentic ways for students to demonstrate learning. So creating authentic assessment design, how we can plan our weekly content based on that, and then best practices in using AI in this context in creating our course learning map. And just like Lori said, please feel free to unmute and interrupt me, put it in the chat. She's going to be monitoring and facilitating that. But I always say, if you wait for me to take a breath to interrupt me, you'll be waiting for a long time because it just seems to go on and on. The words flow out of my mouth. So please just unmute and start talking. And you're more than welcome to interrupt me at any time. All right. So the Core to Canvas challenge. And just for vocabulary, when I say core, that's our curriculum outline of record. And for, I think, both Fresno City and Reedley College are using Curricunet to discover their curriculum outline of record. I believe anybody here from Madera, you have a different repository system, so connect with your curriculum chair to find that. But the curriculum outline of record is that official record that we orient our classes around. So we're going to start with that because no matter what you believe in AI, you need to start with designing your course with that approved curriculum outline of record. It's important for articulation and all sorts of things. All right. So, what is the reality that we face? And for anybody who's a brand new teacher, especially, or if you're starting a new prep, the reality is that you get the core, the curriculum outline of record, and there's this significant gap between, okay, this is what I'm supposed to teach, but oh, how in the world do I actually teach that? The curriculum outline, the SLOs on there, the outcomes, student learning outcomes are typically written at a very high altitude, very broad, comprehensive statements designed to encompass an entire course. So you'll get to 3 to 5 student learning outcomes that can encompass an entire 18-week course or however long you're teaching it. While this serves a lot of purposes for our institution, and I used to be SLO coordinator, so I love SLOs, it often leaves us as faculty wondering, okay, so I have these student learning outcomes that I strongly believe this is what I'm going to start at for my course, but what does that mean for what I teach every week? And this is where we're going to use AI to help us walk through that process. And backward design becomes essential. If you've ever had an extended conversation with me, I'm going to try and put in backward design because I do believe this is the best way for us to design our courses. It's just breaking it down into a very simple 3-step framework, and we're going to look at those very granularly in just a second. But you're looking at the desired course outcomes. You're determining what evidence would demonstrate that. So how would they show me they know those? And then planning those learning experiences. So I've got my student learning outcomes. How would students show me they know that? And then what is the content I need to provide in order for them to have the knowledge to complete that assessment accurately? But here's the problem. We start with step 1. So we've got these very high level student learning outcomes, like students will synthesize diverse perspectives. It's very hard to jump immediately into that step 2, to jump into, all right, so let me design an assessment, because that's a very complex student learning outcome. So this is where AI can become very handy. So again, backward design, a quick reference, identify the outcomes. This is what students should know, determine the evidence, and then plan this experience. So you have it just more clearly spelled out to you. This is what we're going to do right now. So when we look at our curriculum outline of record, it doesn't equal those weekly objectives or even the objectives or the skills for the entire course, because we're going to break it up into what are the skills or objectives for the entire course and how that's going to translate into the weekly work. Your curriculum outline of record might say students will synthesize diverse perspectives on contemporary social issues. Don't know what your student learning outcome is, and that's great. But what does it mean for what you're doing in week 4 or week 9? So we need to deconstruct that into small, measurable learning objectives. When I first started doing this, it really helped me if I thought of learning objectives as skills they want to demonstrate. For those of Fresno City College, I love getting into a debate with Simon over these 2 terms, but it helps my brain in order to think about, okay, what are the skills in the course that I want my students to demonstrate? And that's what I think of as objectives when I'm breaking those student learning outcomes out. It's the hidden design between, okay, I've got my student learning outcomes and what I'm going to deliver. Now, our curriculum outline of records do have objectives on them. I've seen some that have done a really great job in having objectives that measure up to their student learning outcomes, but many actually don't. So this is another piece that you can engage with AI as we start this process of taking the objectives you already have and including that in your mapping process. So figuring out how the objectives on your curriculum outline of record map up to those student learning outcomes, and then deciding what are the additional objectives or skills that I need to include in this mapping process. And AI can be your strategic thought partner in this process. So AI helps you to break down those student learning outcomes into those concrete steps. So our curriculum outline of record has phrases like critically engage with I can't even say the word, epistemological frameworks. And I've seen student learning outcomes that are that high level language. What does that actually mean for what a student is doing? And AI really excels at deconstructing those complex language and breaking it into those concrete skills, knowing Bloom's taxonomy. And that's one of the great things, one of the many great things I really love about utilizing AI is that you don't have to tell it and train it on what something like Bloom's taxonomy is. Bloom's taxonomy is something that it has already been trained in, so you just need to reference that and it already knows what you're talking about. And Bloom's taxonomy is where it's a hierarchy of skills or hierarchy of thinking. So you have lower order thinking up to higher level thinking. The context of this presentation isn't to go into it, but look it up. Fantastic. There's new Bloom's taxonomy and all sorts of stuff. So you want to break down your student learning outcomes into those action verbs. They're identifying, comparing, analyzing, evaluating, or creating. And you can tell that those action verbs have higher order and lower order thinking. Identifying is a lower order thinking. Something like create is a higher order thinking. So that's where you want to think about as you're going through this process, what is the level higher or lower that I'm asking students to complete? Thank you, Lori. So the transformation is we're going to take those student learning outcomes and we're going to break them down using AI into those objectives. So here's where let's get down to it. So select your target. So the first thing you want to do is select your high-level student learning outcomes. Now, for the sake of this demonstration, we're going to start with one. But if you're doing your entire course, you're going to take each and every one of those student learning outcomes and break them down into the skills of your course. And this is also where you're going to have to engage in some back and forth because AI will break it up into 15 different skills, 5 different skills, 10 different skills. You're going to have to decide how granular you want to break those objectives up. And so that's going to be the give and take process. So you're going to take that student learning outcome, and I'm just going to go over the process right now, and we'll do a little demonstration in just a second. You're going to take that student learning outcome, and you're going to give it to AI, whichever AI is your choice, ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude. I like Claude the best. I'm going to use Gemini for this because I'm in Google and it's there and easy for me to use right now. And do that prompt. So let's go ahead and I'm going to take one of my student learning outcomes here. So on my other screen, I've got a student learning outcome from my infant and toddler development course.
Are you wanting us to see Claude? Because we don't.
Yes, I am. I'm going to switch over right now. Gemini. Can you see Gemini? Did it switch over my sharing?
Now I can, yes. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Yep. So I copied and pasted my student learning outcome. So I'm going to put it right here just so I have it, so I remember. So the student learning outcome from my course is demonstrate knowledge of biological and environmental factors that influence preconception and prenatal health and development. Just looking at that, even if you have no idea what child development is, you can tell there's a lot of different things that a student would need to do in order to show they had knowledge of biological and environmental factors that influence preconception and prenatal health and development. That's a lot. So what does that mean for my teaching? How do I assess that? So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to grab my prompt. Just going to copy that. And if you didn't know a trick yet, and everybody probably knows, it took me way too long to figure out, if you hold down the Shift key and hit Enter, it won't submit it, it'll just create another line. It took me way too many months to figure that trick out. So I'm just going to paste it right here, and I've got my little filler. I'm going to paste the vague outcome right here, and then I'm going to read your whole prompt. So I'm going to tell it I have a high-level course outcome for my COR, my curriculum outline of record, and I'm going to add a little bit of context into that prompt. If you've already had a conversation and trained the AI, it would have this additional context, but if it's the first time you're engaging it, you want to include some additional context of this is the level that I'm teaching and those types of things. So I'm going to put for a community college course for infant and toddler teachers. And you can add for a rural community college. I don't think that context in this necessarily matters because they're going to be measurable. So I said I have a high-level course outcome for my curriculum outline of record for community college course for infant and toddler teachers, demonstrate knowledge of biological and environmental factors that influence preconception and prenatal health and development. This is too broad for a weekly plan. Break down into 5 to 7 smaller measurable skills. And I'm actually going to remove this weekly plan. I meant to do that earlier because I just wanted to break it down into the skills, because what I would do first is do this step for every single one of my student learning outcomes so that I'm creating those list of skills associated with my course. So break this down into 5 to 7 smaller, measurable skills or learning objectives a student would need to master to achieve this outcome. Use action verbs from Bloom's taxonomy. And I always like to end with, do you have any questions? And this is where the live demo can go off the rails because it could list 15 questions or it could list none. And see what it says. I know you all are silently judging my chat history right here, aren't you? I would if I was at a presentation. Okay, so it didn't have any questions so far. So let's see what it says. If you haven't experimented with AI recently, I really love that you can do the show thinking. If I'm feeling like I have extra time, I'll go and look at the show thinking. And sometimes it's interesting, sometimes it's not so interesting. Okay, so here's a breakdown of that course outcome into 7 measurable learning objectives. So identify the key biological factors that influence preconception, describe the major stages of prenatal development and identify key developmental milestones, explain the impact of specific environmental factors, teratogens like alcohol or drugs, compare and contrast the influence of maternal and paternal health, analyze the relationship between prenatal nutrition and specific, discuss, evaluate all of those. Now, here is where your expertise comes into play because I need to look and see, all right, given what I know, this is my discipline expertise, do all of these skills are all of these skills needed to be measured in order for me to have enough information so that I can say whether a student has mastered, proficient, whatever word you want to use, the SLO of demonstrate knowledge of biological and environmental factors that influence preconception and prenatal health and development. So after I've read through it, I've decided, yeah, I think that I need to measure all 5 of these things in order for me to know for sure that a student has mastered that. And so the process you go through now is you're going to do that for each and every one of your student learning outcomes. And what you'll have at the very end is an entire list of skills. So I'm just going to do that and say, that was great. I know I get into philosophical debates about people when don't need to be nice to AI, but I kind of feel better when I do. All right, that was great. Can you do the same with the other SLOs? So I'm just going to cut and paste and put those there. Any questions? And this is definitely if you guys want to follow along, but you can just sit there and watch me and silently judge my typing as well. That's fine. So once it's done all of these, it's going to break these down. Again, you are the discipline expert. This is going to be the most time-consuming part of the process. And like everything, it's worth taking the time at the beginning to really decide, are these the skills that I want to measure in my class? If it's a new prep, you might not really know it until you've taught the class one time. Every time I go through the process for a new prep, I'm always changing the skills around just a little bit as I go, and I've tried to measure them and realize it didn't quite measure what I needed to measure. But I'm going to do this for every single one of the course. So I'm just going to cut and paste this. So I've got the information and I'm going to put it on a Word document just to make it easy access for later. Rest assured it is on a Word document on the other screen. Okay, so let's go back to our process. So we've done our prompting. We have gotten all of our skills that are associated with those SLOs, gone through that iterative process to figure out, okay, what are all of the skills that I'm associated with my course? And so when I broke that down, I had, you can't see it because it's on the other screen, but I had 7 skills that were associated with outcome 1, 6 skills associated with outcome 2, and 6 skills that associated with outcome 3, or something like that. So that is a total of 18, 19, something, someone better at math could do that faster, skills that are associated with my class. Now, I'm comfortable with that, but you might not. So this is where it's going to be an iterative process to decide, okay, how many skills do I want, or objectives do I want associated with my content? Okay. So we already did this. I was supposed to do this slide as we did it ourselves. So I encourage you to go through that process that you just watched me do. All right, so what's the next step? So now we've got the skills, and this is that step 2 of our backward design. We've taken our SLOs and we've deconstructed them into, here are the measurable, objective, measurable skills for our course. And these really should align with your module objectives. you can do where the skills that you're measuring are the weekly module objectives, or you can say, here is the objectives of the week. Here are the skills we're going to be measuring. Either way is a personal pedagogical approach. Okay, so now we've got our deconstructed skills in hand. Let's go to the next step of our backward design process. So we've got the skills. Now we have to decide, so what is going to be an acceptable evidence for a student to show me that they have mastered or are proficient, that's my preferred term, in those specific skills. And so instead of asking, how do I assess the ability to synthesize diverse perspectives, we've broken it down into how can students demonstrate they can identify key arguments in a conflicting source. That's taking that student learning outcome that's higher into that skills. And AI can generate some authentic assessment ideas that are tailored to your specific objectives and to the student population, because you can have that back and forth. Now, here is where it's really great to have that conversation with them surrounding those skills, because we can ask AI to help us create some authentic assessments. An authentic assessment means that it mirrors real world application of skills. I have the great fortune of teaching in child development, so it's really easy for me to create, not easy, but it's easier for me to create that line to an authentic assessment, because this is something that they're going to be doing in the real world. It's a career technical education field. But I think in any context, whether you're teaching English or biology, you can create an authentic assessment. And that's where AI can help you think creatively. I love thinking of it as an AI partner. We can also help it to make sure that it's measurable. So we create the career criteria for success. I did another presentation earlier this semester on creating rubrics. I think, I'm pretty sure I did. Sometime I did. Lori can find the link on that. And that it's appropriate, that it measures, it matches the student's readiness and the context. So you're creating assessments that are appropriate to what you're trying to measure, and it's appropriate for the time commitment. That was one thing that I've really tried to focus in on in this latest iteration of doing this process, is having AI help me to figure out if the time commitment I'm asking of students on my assessments is accurate to what I want them to, the time I want them to invest. All right. Any questions? Not yet? Okay. So then let's see what this looks like in action. So I'm going to take one of my objectives, and let me go back, take an earlier one that read. So I'm going to identify, let's see, which one would be fun? You guys can choose. We'll do a little bit of audience participation. Go ahead and put it in the chat. Should we find an assessment for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7? My chat disappeared, Lori. She'll tell me. Tell me who decides the direction.
Okay. So far,
Nobody's.
no one.
Nobody.
Oh, wait. One.
One. Yeah,
Identify.
3.
So one, another one.
Okay, all right. Identify, I think you guys are just being lazy because it was the first one. Identify key biological factors, genetics, parental age, nutrition that influence preconception health. You guys didn't know being an infant toddler caregiver was so complicated, huh? All right. So let's go to Gemini, and I'm going to put this here and get our prompt and say, for this specific learning objective, brainstorm 3 authentic assessment ideas that would allow a community college student to demonstrate it, considered varied formats and real-world applications. I'll do that. Oh, I have a little prompt here. And here is where the more information that you put in and provide, the better output. Now, this is a very basic prompt, but if I wanted to add any more, I would like it to be as AI proof as possible. I would like it to take students about 30 minutes to complete. And so now I can do this process for every single one of those objectives. Now, however you've broken those objectives out, you can also combine them. And this is where that you're front loading all of that prep work. So it's definitely, I can speak very empathetically about this. It is a lot of time when you're starting your prep and your process for a new course with this, because you're going through this iterative process and discovering, okay, which of these skills do I need to measure, which can be combined. And a lot of my assessments, I'll take a look at the skills and say, all right, I want to create an assessment that is going to measure multiple of these skills. And that's where your discipline expertise is going to come up. All right, so now we have in our conversation, it's generated 3 different possible authentic assessment. So the parent question, I've created a mini scenario, and we go through the clinic handout critique. We have examples, the key factors, concept map. So I don't want to take the time to read all these. This is, again, the problem with live demonstration. So let's just pick one. So I'm going to say, I love suggestion number 2. What questions might students have about this assessment? And this is a process I like to do for any assessment that I designed, because even though it's designed the assessment for you, because you didn't explicitly tell it to think through the questions, explicitly saying, hey, what questions might students have is going to force it into that process. And so you go through that process, and it's, again, same thing with everything. You're going to create this iterative design, review, refine, go back and forth until you create that perfect assignment. And so from this point forward, I would answer all these questions. I would have it create the assessment. Most of the time, I have to go and word tweak and change things as it is, and then create the rubric that goes along with that. And that's the process that you're going to go through for every single one of the objectives that you've designed for your course. Okay, so we've done step 1. We've taken the student learning outcomes, and we've disaggregated them into the skills that we want to measure, the objectives that we want to measure, and then we've chosen, the assessments that are going to align with those objectives. You see how why this is considered backward design? Because if you think about, if you are prepping a class, most of us do it the exact opposite. Where do we start? We start with the book, right, that we were handed, and then we decide what we're going to measure, and then we decide on the assessments and see how the assessments match up with that, and then maybe figure out how the SLOs fit in with those assessments that we've designed. So that's why backward design is named so appropriately, because we have flipped that on its head. All right. Any questions? Doing good?
I think we're all good so far.
All right. Perfect. Okay, so here is our process laid out, and we're going to add some additional steps to this process. I've said it again and again and again. Start with that curriculum outline of record. And if the knowledge that there is a curriculum outline of record that affixes to your course is brand new, now you know. Always start with the approved curriculum outline of record. And if you're full-time faculty or part-time faculty, talk to your full-time faculty about this. There's a lot that you can do to change that curriculum outline of record. If there's things that you don't like, there's going to be articulation and all sorts of things, but don't not use it as your North Star because you don't like it. Go through the process of deciding, okay, what are the things that I can change, and change those. All right, that's my soapbox. So we've taken that. We're going to now take a look at the lecture and lab topics in just a second, but we've gotten our clear objectives. We've designed our learning experiences. So now what we're going to do is we're going to map our course content to our objectives and skills. This is the part that gets super messy, and I can guarantee my live demonstration is probably going to be a mess, but just keep in mind that in theory, not in theory, it does work really well, but you're going to see some of the iterative process. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go back, and I'm going to start a new chat because I've confused the process. So I'm going to go back and grab my first student learning outcomes. I have it on another page right here. And I'm going to ask the AI, Gemini, Claude, GPT, whatever you use, to map all of the lecture or lab content to the the objectives that I've created. So I'm going to go to my curriculum outline of record. And I have it over on my other screen. I think it'll take too long to, well, I'll share it just in case anybody here has not seen the curriculum outline of record. So here is the curriculum outline of record that I've pulled from CurricuNet. You all are in my way. And if you scroll down, here's the student learning outcomes, here's the objective. So this is what I was cut and pasting from before. So I'm going to take my lecture content and I'm going to copy it. And now go back over. And I'm going to declutter a little bit. So I'm just going to create a new chat. Okay. And say, I would like for you to map the concepts from my community college. Actually, you know what? Let's see what happens if we stay on the same chat. So I don't have to retype this. Okay. That was great. Thank you. Once you go back and map the objectives you created earlier to my course content from my core. And here is where you start having to get very specific on the formatting you want it to spit out the information. So I'm telling it I'm going to provide you with the lecture outline. And when you're looking at the different tools, ChatGPT and Gemini do much better at cutting and pasting the formatting. Claude likes to mess up your formatting. So things like outlines are sometimes better to use Gemini. I've got some advantages that I like about Claude too, but sometimes Gemini does a little bit better at keeping the formatting. So personal choice. So I'm going to provide you with a lecture outline. Can you map the objectives to the lecture outline? You can replicate the objectives as needed. Always end with, do you have any questions? I'm relying on you, Lori, to tell me if there's anything in the chat I need to pay attention to.
Yeah, there is. Someone asked, when you start a new chat, does it reset the AI learning that you previously did?
Yeah, I haven't looked at this on Gemini as much. Claude just introduced an option where you can tell it to access your previous chats. There is a setting in Gemini where you can allow it or disallow it to access previous chats. I wouldn't assume that it's going to pull from previous chats. So if you want it to pull from previous chats, you can provide that as an instruction. So previously we talked about in a previous chat, whatever it might be. If you're concerned about it, you can just stay in the same thread and just make sure and clearly articulate what you want to do. It does pretty good when you do a big long thread of remembering correctly if you let it know exactly what you want it to go back to. It's just one of those processes where you get to know the different little nuances of it. But yes, it does remember it, but I wouldn't count on it unless you're doing a specific prompt. Did I answer the question, Lori, or did I misunderstand it?
I mean, that's how I understood the question.
Okay.
And with ChatGPT, I think there is a way you can turn off memory, but I never have. And I did ask it a question one time. And well, now because I've been doing so much PD with it, it does remember certain things. But one time it remembered and applied it to something I wasn't asking it to apply it to that. So it can be tricky, but it does remember.
Yeah. And that's always where the problem is. It's one of the reasons I've switched to Claude because you can create projects within it and it'll remember everything in that project. So I create a project for each one of my courses. So everything in there applies. And I've got the curriculum outline of record as one of the files I ask it to reference. And I can show that when I'm done. All right. So I've put in the lecture content. Here it goes. And remember, Oops. See, I didn't remember the objectives. Okay. So let's go ahead and just give it the objectives. Here are they, and that's one of the reasons I cut and pasted it on a Word document. Here are the outcomes and objectives. Oops. Let's see what it does. So I asked it to gave it the learning outcomes and the objectives. If I was taking my time and doing this not in a live presentation, I would have made sure and taken only objectives out and not had those student learning outcomes. But for the sake of efficiency and time for the presentation, I just pasted it all in there and told it to not pay attention to the student learning outcomes. Now, you're going to have a longer wait time for something like this because it's a little bit complicated, but it's still pretty comprehensive. I'm trying to read and talk at the same time, and it wasn't working to see if it did everything that we wanted to do. Oh, here we go. So you hear right here where it's put down the objectives and done the key. So I didn't even ask it to do the key, but these are what the key is that connects to over here. And so we've got the lecture content. Remember, I've taken directly from my curriculum outline of record, and it's now mapped all the learning objectives over here to the pieces of my outline that, not pieces, all of the outline that I pasted into it. And you can export to sheets. So one of the advantages of using Gemini is it'll export it into a Google product. So it likes sheets, so I can export into sheets that I want. It's asking me because this is a class with a lab content if I want to do lab skills next, but I'm going to ask it. And this is one of the key parts of the process is asking it, were there any lecture pieces not covered, not assessed in the objectives, or any objectives that did not have lecture content it equated to. So what I'm doing is just making sure that as I've assembled my list of objectives and it's mapped it to the lecture content, are there any lecture content? Because remember, this is from your official curriculum outline of record. So you want to make sure that you're covering all that lecture content. So if I'm doing backward design and starting from those objectives and then creating the content from that, I want to make sure that my objectives that I've created actually align with all of my lecture content. And so let's see what it says. It always compliments me because I'm wonderful and it agrees. The only one lecture topic didn't have specific measure objective and current research. And it's saying why this is okay. But now we have a lot of objectives that were not mapped to lecture content. And so here is where I have to go through that iterative process as the discipline expert and say, all right, so then do I have too many objectives? Where is the disconnect between my lecture outline and my student learning outcomes or my objectives? One of the kind of extra benefits that I found in this process is being able to find those disconnects in my curriculum outline of record. Like, oh my goodness, I do have lecture content that is not being mapped up to the student learning outcomes. And so that's something where as your program goes through a program review process, this process can help you identify those gaps. Okay, so we've gone through this and it's had the whole conversation. Again, for the sake of time, I won't read all of this, but it's telling me here's some objectives that were not mapped to my lecture content because they are not lecture objectives. So then let's say, can you complete the mapping to the lab content and find the gaps in mapping? Any questions about that process while it goes through this?
So I'm sorry if I totally missed this. You did this second. Would you normally do this first, the mapping?
Nope.
Okay. Or did I miss like step?
What do you mean, like
I don't know.
before you do the objectives? So for the backward design, you would always want to start with the objectives
Okay.
because you want to start with, okay, what
Got
is
it.
if my outcomes are my North Star? Then I break that empty objectives and then I map it. And then it's that back and forth. Before I've done the mapping, I'll look at the objectives. And quite frankly, I would have weeded out some of those objectives. So there probably wouldn't have been such a disconnect because AI likes to over disaggregate and create a lot of extra skills for you to map. And there's some that can easily be combined. So it probably wouldn't have been so much of a disconnect had I taken the time. But no, yeah, you want to start, get those objectives and now map it to the content.
Got
Okay, let's see with my gap amount analysis. So it's telling me here's where the gaps are. So ultimately, your current objectives are strong on analysis and observation, but they don't measure the student's ability to apply the knowledge. You may want to consider developing a new outcome, apply developmental knowledge in a lab setting with corresponding objectives to assess these critical hands-on lab skills. And now, as a disciplined faculty, that's a really important thing for me to consider because it's an obvious gap where my student learning outcomes are associated heavily with all of the lecture content, but none of that is associated with what I've said is going to be in my lab content. So that's an opportunity for me as a disciplined faculty to suggest changes in the student learning outcomes to make sure that I'm covering all that lecture and lab content. So that's that process. All right. So am I sharing my presentation again?
Yes.
Good. All right, perfect. Okay. So we're on number 4. We've mapped our course content. So now we want to create our coherent module. So each week connects to a topic, an objective, an activity, and assessment. So here's where we can start breaking down that process. So now that we've done all this mapping, and again, this is going to be a much more iterative process. I'm doing it efficiently so that you can see the whole process, but all of this is going to take many more hours. I don't want to downplay because I don't want you to be frustrated. Like, she did this in a 50-minute session. It's going to take you a lot of hours to break down those student learning outcomes into the objectives you're comfortable with and go back and forth in this process. So I don't want to give you any false sense that this part will be a whole lot less time. It's going to take time. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, I teach this course as in we're going to 8-week courses. So we're going to I teach this course as an 8-week course. Can you break the content and objectives down into 8 separate course modules? And this is where it kind of gets fun to be able to reconceptualize how you might teach a course. And remember, we've also now gone through, before we did the objectives, we've created assessments for all those objectives, and then we've done the mapping. So we would add in here, I'm not going to because it's going to confuse it. Insert those assessments that are started, that are affixed to it. So we'll put it here. Provide, okay, attach the assessments we created earlier to the outline. And that is not a very good prompt, but let's see what it comes up with. So that process that it's doing, again, is we've started with our student learning outcomes. We've had AI help us break those student learning outcomes into those measurable objectives, skills, however you want to. We've looked at those and refined those objectives, skills into things that, yep, I'm comfortable measuring this. Then remember, we took those skills and we decided how I wanted to assess that. So that's going to be that important middle process. And that's going to be, if you're teaching a fully online class, you can do that for, okay, here's my big assessment. Here's my quiz questions, my formative assessments, and here's my discussion board. You can do all of that in that process. And the great thing about AI is you can do it in that continuous chat if you want to. It will get a little muddled if you do a lot of iterations. So you might want to start another chat once you've pulled out your objectives, pulled out your assessments, pulled out your mapping, and then start this process with a clear chat so it doesn't get confused. All right, so now we have our 8-week course module map. We've got module 1, Foundations, Theory, and Prenatal Development. Here are the content that is from my lecture outline, the objectives that is mapped to that course outline, and then the assessment that goes with that, that we've created all of those. Module 2, our topic, our subsections, and then our objectives and our assessment, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, this is all going to take that discipline expertise because if you've taught the course before, you might have a good understanding that some of these topics are going to be more dense. And so I'm going to want to break it up a little bit more. When we're looking at short-term scheduling, especially though, it's really great to have a more objective lens on breaking those pieces up because if you're doing a very truncated or condensed rather schedule, we don't have a lot of opportunity to say they need longer on these concepts because we have to get through all the concepts in such a short amount of time. So I've really liked the objectivity sometimes of AI to create that scheduling because with a short-term schedule, I have to get through everything. And so the temptation isn't to stretch things out when I don't have that much luxury to do so. Okay. So does it make sense to you how we went now from our student learning outcomes? We've broken those up into the measurable skills, objectives, weeded those out, designed each assessment for those objectives, taken those objectives and mapped it to lecture content and lab content if you teach a lab. And now what we've created is an 8-week course, 16, 10, whatever, however you want to break it down, map that we can start building our course from. Any questions about that process? Nope. Okay. So now the very last step, and this is where Lori knows I will never do a presentation that I'm not going to bring up how amazing OER is, because if you teach with open educational resources, you can close this cycle. What I then can do is I can take my complete openly licensed textbook that I want to use, and I can give it to the AI and say, okay, here is all of the subjects and chapters in my OER. I can even give it the whole OER and say, can you map the content? And here is the final ending of our backward design. Can you map all of the content from my OER textbook to this course map that we've created right here? And I love being able to finish with this process because what it's really helped me to do is that I can take out what I call all of that white noise. How most of us started teaching, well, maybe not you, but how I started teaching is I was handed the textbook and say, okay, teach. So I went through and it was 16, 17, 18, 12, however many chapters, and looked at, okay, how would I take those 17 chapters and divide that for my 18-week semester? Easy. We'll cover a chapter a week and have a week for this. But when you take the time to do backward mapping, you realize that a textbook publisher doesn't get to tell me the content that I need to teach. I need to map it to what my course outline of record says. I need to map it to what the objectives are I want my students to walk away from my course. And then the very last step is deciding what is the course content that I need to provide to my students so that they can be successful in their assessments so that I can know if they've mastered or been proficient in those student learning outcomes. So you see how that's that backward design process. From previous, most of our teaching experience would do the exact opposite. We start with the content, we put it together, we figure out our assessments, and then we try and match up our outcomes to those assessments. We flip that with the backward design. And AI can really help us think objectively through that entire process by breaking all of those steps down into those measurable options. So we've broken our student learning outcomes down into measurable objectives, thinking about what is the level of thinking or level of higher order, lower order thinking that I want to do. I've then figured out with it what assessment I'm going to do. So had that iterative process of creating those authentic assessments. It's really great at thinking through some really fun, creative, authentic assessment. mapped my course content, created my modules, and I've added my content. I have the entire structure now of that Canvas course that I'm going to assemble, because now I can take a look at this and design my module 1 and figure out which of these are pages, and have those objectives on that first introductory page of the module. Okay. Oh, I forgot I had a prompt. Sometimes I'm smarter when I put it together than I am during presentation. So it's in the presentation. Here's a prompt that you can use. I didn't use that prompt. It would have been easier than watching me type, but here's the prompt that you can use. I really hope that in the course of the last 15 minutes, I've really emphasized to you that you are the human in the loop. I know there's a lot of different conversations and concerns really about AI taking away our position as instructors, but as you engage in this process, you realize that there's no way this AI is going to do it properly without my continual feedback and training of it. The more hours you realize you're spending on this process, you realize you are an important piece of this iterative process. You are the expert on knowing what your discipline and your specific course you're teaching actually needs, the time students are going to spend on it, how would be the appropriate way to measure those. You're simply using AI as an objective thought partner to help you assemble that course. You are the pedagogical expert. We are expertise in our individual discipline. There's a reason that we've been hired to do this. So don't think that by outsourcing or engaging in this iterative process with AI that you're outsourcing your pedagogical expertise. It would be the same as if you had access to a really intelligent colleague that you could sit down and do this. We don't always have the time to do that. AI is available to you at 2 a.m. when you can't sleep. It helps you to be understand students. It can think through a different lens, think through different challenges that you might not be able to think through in your own perspective. AI is a tireless assistant that eliminates the blank page syndrome when generating options so quickly. So I use the example that it's like a really intelligent colleague. If you're a new faculty, especially, are prepping a new course, your colleague is probably going to get really tired of you asking questions all the time. AI does not get tired. It's always polite to you. It never says, "Oh my goodness, we've gone over this, Amanda. I can't believe you're asking it again." It's going to be tireless. So it can be a really great way to engage in that back and forth because it's not going to be judgy or get tired of having that iterative process with you. So again, hope this cycle has been clear. You're starting with your curriculum outline of record. You're going to deconstruct those outcomes, design the assessments, plan the weekly path, and all along that time, you're going to apply your discipline expertise. The bottom line is that it's not replacing your pedagogical judgment, it's just amplifying it. I'd love to be able to sit down with really college faculty. Fresno City, you've got a fantastic instructional designer of your own, Sue, that would happily do this with you as well. This really is the things that IDs love to do. So if it's something you're interested in and think, oh, this would be really cool to sit down, absolutely book an appointment with me. I really, really love to do this much more than figuring out why Canvas is broken. So don't hesitate to ask the ID to come in and help you through this process.